start in life to support parents and families.
I agree very strongly with my honourable friend, and I'm grateful to him for raising this. I agree that while the Conservatives have said that they think parental leave is excessive, we want to give families more choices. And through the Employment Rights Bill, we will make paternity leave available from day one in a new job and enable paternity leave to be taken after shared parental leave. We are also committed to reviewing the parental leave system to ensure that it better supports working families.
Natasha Irons.
Mr Speaker, independent research from the Social Mobility Foundation highlights a stark class pay gap, with professionals from working class backgrounds earning on average 12% less than their more privileged counterparts in the same roles, and 1 in 10 people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds having higher skilled managerial and professional occupations finding that difficult to come across. But despite this socioeconomic background remaining one of the biggest determinants in chances for life for young people in this country, few large organisations monitor it. So will the Minister consider mandating large organisations to monitor socioeconomic backgrounds so that we can properly highlight social mobility and give it the attention it deserves?
I share my honourable friend's concern in this area, and that's why we are committed to enacting the socio-economic duty of the Equality Act, and we'll give more information on this in due course. Of course, I would encourage as well, Mr Speaker, businesses and organisations to collect data where we can, so we can take action to tackle some of those deep-rooted inequalities that my honourable friend describes.
David Williams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and Merry Christmas to you and yours. As we know, there's a clear link between low household income and poorer educational outcomes, leading to reduced future earnings. In Stoke-on-Trent, median pay is nearly £70 less per week than the England average. Will the Minister agree with me that tackling regional income inequalities is critical if we are to promote social mobility and to enable all of our people to succeed in life?
I agree with my honourable friend. It is absolutely crucial that we take action on regional inequalities, and he champions very strongly this cause on behalf of his constituents. He'll know that we have set out an ambitious plan for the future of the minimum wage, and we are taking action to make sure that all workers receive more money in their pockets to spend. But he also draws our attention to the importance of children having a great start in life, and that's why we as a government are committed to making sure that more children than ever arrive at school and get the support that they need, so that by the end of reception they're ready to move on to the next stage in their journey.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the City of London, one of the big challenges remaining is to ensure that maximum number of people from the widest socio-economic backgrounds can get into that industry. Recently, I met with Progress Together and Vincent Keaveney, a recent Lord Mayor of London, who's made massive progress to understand that the data collection process does not need to be expensive. Will the Secretary of State get in touch with her ministerial colleagues and the Financial Conduct Authority to alert them to the opportunity to collect data at little expense that would really raise the profile of the challenge remaining?
Yes, Mr Speaker, I'd be more than happy to do that, and I do thank and congratulate the right honourable gentleman for his work in this area, for the attention that he has drawn to it, because I think it is a cause that we can all get behind. I think there is also more that employers can be asked to do, as he describes, but also more that we as government can do, and that's why I think it's also important that all young people have access to good work experience and careers guidance, so that they understand the full range of opportunities that are out there in the world.
Jess Brown-Fuller.
Speaker. Women carers are far more likely to reduce their working hours or give up work entirely to look after their loved ones, which is putting them at a significant financial disadvantage. Does the Secretary of State agree that the Lib Dem policy to reform social care and to introduce free personal care would keep more women in work for longer?
I understand the important point that the Honourable Lady raises, and she will know that through the budget we did increase the threshold around carers allowance and also delivered a big boost in terms of the payments that people can receive. But I do understand the wider challenge that she sets out around social care. That's why the Health Secretary is taking action to make sure that we do transform social care across our country, and I'm sure that ministers will be happy to discuss that with her further.
Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, introduced to the House yesterday, sets out to unpick every aspect of the school reforms which have seen English children rocket up the international league tables in reading, maths and science. How can this government possibly say they want to break down barriers to opportunity when they're reversing the reforms which have transformed the lives of the most disadvantaged students?
Mr Speaker, I don't know which bill the Honourable Lady has been reading, because it's not the bill that we presented to the House yesterday. I am determined to drive high and rising standards right across our school system. I would also just say to the Honourable Lady that she might be satisfied that 1 in 4 disadvantaged children leave primary school without reaching a good standard in English and maths. I am not happy about that, and I'm not happy about the fact that 1 in 5 children are persistently absent from school, and that we have inherited a SEND system in crisis. We will turn this around. We will deliver better life chances for all of our children.
Kirsty Blackman.
Earning women are far less likely to have sufficient private pensions than their male counterparts. Is this why the Secretary of State has decided that governmental responsibility ends when working age ends?
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady does raise an important point around some of the differences we see in pensions. I'm sure I'd be more than happy to pick that up with the relevant minister to see that she receives a full response to the question she asks.
Right. Mims Davis, Sir Secretary.
Mr Speaker, Merry Christmas, and here is to festive tipples in our locals. But it's certainly not a cheery Christmas for the waspy women that Labour have betrayed. Now, hospitality is at the heart of our economy with a diverse workforce. 17% Equality Act disabled, 20% ethnic minority groups, and over 54% of the sector's workers are women. Can the Secretary of State tell the House what conversations have taken place between her and the Chancellor on the chilling effect on future earnings due to the Labour government's jobs tax, higher business rates underpinned by £3.4 billion of costs increase, according to Hospitality UK, which will drive down future earnings?
I agree that the hospitality sector is absolutely crucial to our economy, and at this time of year when many people will be working across Christmas, I do pay tribute to them and for their work and thank them for their contribution to our economy. On the wider question that the Right Honourable Lady raises, she knows as well as I do that this government inherited a £22 billion black hole from the party opposite. We have had to make some difficult decisions in order to stabilise our economy and to get it back on track.
Jacob Collier.
3, Mr Speaker.
Sorry. Merry Christmas, Mr Speaker. So this government is relentless in our efforts to halve violence against women and girls, and in just 5.5 months in office we have launched domestic abuse protection orders in selected areas, outlined new measures enhancing our response to stalking, announced £30 million extra funding for victims of domestic abuse and their families in safe accommodation services, and this is simply the beginning. We will continue at this pace.
Jacob Collier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Violence against women and girls remains a serious issue, worsened by online abuse, misinformation and harmful rhetoric which risks increasing violence. In my constituency of Burton and Uttoxeter, the charity SARAC provides vital support to survivors while working to challenge these attitudes and promote cultural change. Given the crucial role of charities like SARAC, what steps is the Minister taking to support such organisations, and will she visit them with me so that she can see the amazing work that they do?
I thank my honourable friend, and at these questions I end up halfway around the country, but I will absolutely be delighted to come. And what I know, having worked in this particular sector, is that we will not tackle violence against women and girls without a strong and sustainable model for ensuring that our specialist services are protected, and that is what we will work on in the long term rather than what has always been a short-termist approach.
Diamond.
Very much, Mr Speaker. Ultra-realistic deep fake porn is increasingly being used to target women, and I know the government agrees because they committed to criminalising it in their manifesto. And for the sake of victims, this intimate image abuse needs to be tackled without delay. So why on earth did they not back Baroness Owen's bill to ban it in the House of Lords last Friday? Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady is a great talker. She talks a good game, but for the sake of women, when is she going to deliver?
As somebody who has went into the Home Office and found a load of things that have been dwindling for 3 years undone from people saying things at this dispatch box, I take umbrage. But what I will say is that this government will, in this session, do exactly what we said we did, and we will ban deep fakes. And as a victim of it myself, I understand the importance.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and of course, Merry Christmas. We know that violence against women and girls takes many forms: verbal, physical, emotional, financial, at all ages. But one of the most insidious forms is that online abuse. But with technology developing faster than legislation can respond, the ways that it's used, like deepfakes, is also developing faster than legislation can respond. And the use of generative AI to create fake intimate images leaves many women vulnerable. I know that this is something that the Minister cares deeply about. So can she tell us what steps the Government are going to take to ensure it's tackled properly? And will she work with Cabinet colleagues to create a new online crime agency to deal with this threat?
I thank the honourable lady, and funnily enough, I'm meeting with Cabinet Office colleagues later today to talk exactly about how we make sure that the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy is across different government departments. Without doubt, one of the most important pillars in that is how we're going to deal with the online harms. We all wait with bated breath to see how the legislation and the new regulations play out, but what I would say is that we don't draw a line at the legislation that already exists, and where we need to adapt, we will.
Aldridge.
For Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, with permission, I will answer questions 4 and 11 together. Conversion practices are abuse. They have no place in society and must be stopped. The Conservatives promised to ban conversion practices 6 years ago and failed to deliver. They then dropped it from their manifesto this summer. We're getting on with the job and are working hard on legislation to deliver a trans-inclusive ban that offers protection from these harmful practices, whilst also preserving the freedom for individuals to explore their identity and respecting the important roles of those supporting them. We will publish our draft bill later this session, as outlined in the King's Speech.
Mr Speaker, conversion practices trade and prosper on fear, prejudice and intolerance. Charities in Weston-super-Mare and across this country do amazing work to bring communities together to promote tolerance and tackle prejudice. Can the Minister outline what support this government is providing to help charities deliver this vital work in constituencies like mine?
Indeed, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend, the member for Weston-super-Mare, is right that civil society plays a unique role in challenging prejudice and enabling more people to access the opportunities they deserve. A good example is Gallup, the UK's leading LGBT+ anti-violence charity, which provides a number of government-funded support services, including on conversion practices. Their helpline is confidential and available to anyone who is at risk of, is experiencing, or has been through a conversion practice.
It's Osborne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week I held a meeting in Parliament with a panel of trans people talking about their experiences of so-called conversion therapy, and their evidence was harrowing. I want to thank the MPs and the Minister that attended to listen to them. I'm leading on a report for the Council of Europe to ban these aberrant practices across Europe, and I'm pleased to hear from the Minister that we'll soon be setting out the legislation. But will the Minister tell me, will the legislation be fully inclusive without all exceptions so that we can refer to it as best practice for all countries to use?
Indeed, Mr Speaker, I pay tribute to my honourable friend for her work in this field, including on the Council of Europe, and I can assure her that we will deliver on our manifesto commitment to bring forward a full trans-inclusive ban on conversion practices, protecting LGBT+ people from abuse. We are committed to listening to all viewpoints and concerns with respect and to engaging with a wide range of stakeholders, organisations and all LGBT+ communities. And I was very pleased to join her at the event she mentioned, and we will be having further engagements with parliamentarians and stakeholders in the new year.
Rebecca Paul.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The previous government committed to a parent-first approach to guidance. As part of the government's review of the statutory RSHE guidance, will she make it clear that parents should be involved in decisions affecting their children, including if they are gender questioning?
Yeah. But as you will be well aware, we are looking at the consultation responses and we will respond more fully as is appropriate.
Campbell.
Speaker, in rolling out any legislation, will the Minister ensure that mature adults who want to take part of their own volition in faith-based settings to discuss gender issues will not be restricted or inhibited from so doing?
Well done. I can assure the honourable gentleman that we are looking very carefully at how to describe the sorts of behaviour that would not be criminalised by the ban.
George Southwell.
Question number 5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government is committed to breaking down the barriers of opportunity for all and to raise equality throughout government so that our missions deliver for everyone. We are working on our plans to legislate, to introduce mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting for large employers and enshrine in law the right to equal pay for ethnic minority people. These measures were announced as part of the Equality, Race and Disability Bill, on which we will consult early next year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend the government's commitment to tackling discrimination. For example, introducing ethnicity pay gap reporting for large employers. In Ilford South, nearly 80% of my constituents are from black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds, a community disproportionately impacted by conditions like diabetes. What's the government doing to tackle health inequalities and disparities amongst minority ethnic individuals?
Mr. Speaker, he raises a vital issue on behalf of his constituents, and the cross-government approach we are taking to tackle the root causes of health inequalities is central to our health mission. This includes prioritising prevention and shifting care closer to communities. On type 2 diabetes, the NHS has developed a focused engagement campaign to raise awareness with those groups who are most likely to develop the condition on which he may wish to connect.
John Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, Merry Christmas and a good New Year when it comes. Mr. Speaker, I was astonished that the vacillating Prime Minister did not take the opportunity to rule out definitively blasphemy laws in this country. They have no place in modern British society. This is the land of Monty Python and the life of Brian after all. Will the Minister take the opportunity to do what the Prime Minister would not and rule out completely any opportunity to introduce blasphemy laws?
Yes.
Sarah Owen, Chair of the Select Committee.
Merry Christmas, Mr. Speaker. Following the summer's racist riots, the Runnymede Trust reported Islamophobia is reaching fever pitch. Mosques attacked and threatened, cars vandalised with Nazi swastikas. All this has left many Muslims feeling unsafe, but it is especially true for women. Women have reported having hijabs pulled off, racist abuse and threatened with physical violence. This is something we will have heard from all our own constituents, but the extent to which Islamophobia and misogyny is systemic in the structures we rely on means Muslim women bear the brunt of the intersectional hatred of the far right and, sadly, sometimes mainstream media. Does the Minister see the need for an agreed definition of Islamophobia and understanding of the impact of Muslim women?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Islamophobia, sexism and racism have no place in our society, and she will be aware that we have committed to strengthening protections against dual discrimination. My colleague, the Minister for Safeguarding, is also working on the issues addressing hate crime against Muslim women. I'm also pleased to see the work that my Honourable Friends Committee is going to be undertaking on the specific challenges facing Muslim women in the UK today, and I look forward to following the work of that committee.
Speaker, I recently met with a group of women from Bangladeshi origins in my constituency who are desperately trying to find work, which is not easy, especially after the decimation of the textile industry in my constituency of Leicester South. As English is not their first language and all potential employers not having the capacity or the time to meet the DWP's demands for a written proof of job application and interviews, they're finding it extremely stressful and affecting their mental health, especially when threatened with sanctions. Does the Minister agree with me that more empathy is needed to be built into the system?
I thank the honourable gentleman. He's raised an important point, and I will ensure that he has a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss it.
Shadow Secretary of State Clerk continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Secretary of State said that background should be no barrier to success. But what message does it send to our young people when they're told there are some job opportunities they cannot apply to solely based on the colour of their skin? Equality in this country must mean equality of opportunity, not putting some people in society on a pedestal above others. So will the Minister write to all public bodies to make it crystal clear that the state should not be sanctioning race-based hiring policies?
It is illegal to discriminate. She will be aware that it is illegal to discriminate in the way that she is described, and I will certainly ensure that that the question she has raised will be followed up with my relevant colleagues.
Those in writing, we come to topicals.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this month, the Government set out our plan for change, a plan to raise living standards for everyone. Everyone should have access to warm homes, a revitalised NHS, opportunities to thrive at work and to feel safe on our streets. And I am proud to be driving our mission to ensure that background is no barrier to success and that every child has the best start in life. This week marks the end of Disability History Month, during which my right honourable friend, the Minister for Disability, has met with disabled people and disabled people's organisations and set up a network of lead ministers for disability across every government department.
Those in writing.
Last week, I visited Northamptonshire Domestic Abuse Services. We discussed, as Domestic Abuse UK estimates, that reported incidents spiked up to 20% during the Christmas period. Can the Minister tell me what the government is doing to ensure that those affected by domestic violence can get support at this time of year?
Can I thank my honourable friend for that important question and pay tribute to the work of Northamptonshire Domestic Abuse Services and everyone working across domestic violence and sexual abuse services this Christmas. I know from my own experience working in such services over this Christmas period how busy it can be. But I want to send a message to all victims that support is always there when you need it, even at Christmas, and the police will always respond where they are called, where there are serious concerns. People should know that they are not alone at Christmas, Mr. Speaker, and that help and support is always available.
Shadow Secretary of State Claire Coutinho.
Mr. Speaker, turning a blind eye to the risks of vulnerable people in the name of inclusivity is anything but compassionate. We know that cousin marriage significantly increases the risk of childbirth defects and locks women into coercive relationships. The Right Honourable Member for Basildon and Billericay brought forward sensible legislation to ban this practice. Why won't the government support it?
Mr. Speaker, the government will of course always keep such issues under review, and I'll make sure the Minister in the relevant department speaks with the Right Honourable Lady on this topic.
Absolutely. Lee Pitcher.
Mr. Speaker, Merry Christmas. Recently I attended an RNIB event highlighting challenges faced by blind and visually impaired people navigating past parked cars, forcing them to walk into the road. My inspirational wife is one of those people who takes her life into her own hands every time she walks into the road. Can I ask what the government will do to help make our streets safer and make them more navigable in the future?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend raises a good example of the kind of topic that we need to work across government on, and I was pleased to chair the first meeting of the cross-government disability lead ministers yesterday. The Department of Transport has consulted on the problem that he's raised, which can be very serious for people with a sight impairment, and the Department is considering the options for tackling the problem, and I very much hope that he'll let me know what he finds out in his walk around the constituency shortly.
Gregory Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always nice to get a cheer, Mr. Speaker. As a former treasurer of the Oxford Union, I was disgusted that 3 weeks ago there was a debate that descended into a mess of anti-Semitism, where the students voted in a majority that they would not have reported Hamas's plans if they'd known them prior to the 7th of October attacks. Will the Secretary of State write to the Oxford Union and say that anti-Semitism has no place in our society, and especially not our universities?
The government could not have been clearer in terms of our position on anti-Semitism. There is no place for anti-Semitism in our society, nor for any form of racism. That applies whether it's within educational settings in any other part of our society. That's been made very clear indeed. Thank you.
That completes questions. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Chris Hinchcliffe.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday I met the brave men and women serving on HMS Iron Duke and the troops serving in Operation Kabaret in Estonia. This Christmas, as every Christmas, members of our armed forces will be serving overseas, working day and night to protect Britain's national security. And I know that the whole House will join me in sending our deepest thanks to them, to our emergency services and everyone working to keep the country safe over the festive period. Mr. Speaker, may I also take this opportunity at the end of the year to thank you and the House staff for all your hard work this year. And can I wish everyone across the House a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Recently.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks. In 2021, Kerry and Francis Menai Davis, who live in my constituency of North East Hertfordshire and are in the gallery here today, tragically lost their son Hugh at the age of just 6 to a rare form of cancer. Now they are courageously campaigning to ensure that every parent who must leave work to look after a sick child in hospital gets the financial support that they need from day one. Will the Prime Minister meet with them and me to discuss implementing Hugh's law and giving their son a legacy that improves the lives of families at the most difficult time imaginable?
Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to Kerry and Francis? It is a heartbreaking case and commend them for their campaign on behalf of other families. I know the Minister for Social Security and Disability met the family yesterday, but no parent should endure losing their child to cancer, particularly at such a young age. We are investing £1.5 billion for new surgical hubs and scanners, £70 million for new radiotherapy machines, and we will set out our next steps on the Children and Young People Cancer Task Force shortly.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, can I send my warmest wishes to our armed forces at home and overseas, to the emergency services and everyone who will be working over Christmas. And can I wish you, Mr. Speaker, the House staff and all members of this House a very Merry Christmas. Mr. Speaker, for years, the Prime Minister and his cabinet played politics with the WASPy women. The Deputy Prime Minister said Conservatives were stealing their pensions. She promised to compensate them in full. Another broken promise. Now they admit we were right all along. But let's ask about another group of pensioners whose trust... Let's ask about another group of pensioners whose trust was broken. Since the Chancellor cut winter fuel payments, how many extra people have applied for pension credit?
Mr. Speaker, the number one job of this government was to put the finances back in order after the last government lost control. They left a £22 billion black hole and we had to take tough choices. We made sure the most vulnerable pensioners do get the winter fuel payment, and we have been encouraging and driving up eligibility for pension credit, so saying up to their entitlement. And she should join that campaign. But, Mr. Speaker, here's the difference. Because we've stabilised the economy, we can commit to the triple lock. That means that next April, pensioners get another £470. But here's the difference, because 2 weeks ago, the Shadow Chancellor said the triple lock is unsustainable. Their position, so pensioners would lose out under the Tories yet again.
Mr. Speaker, he didn't answer the question because he doesn't know the answer. There are 850,000 eligible pensioners not claiming pension credit. If they sign up, that will cost the Treasury £2.3 billion, wiping out the savings that the Chancellor claimed she would make. Before the election, his Chief Secretary told the public they had no plans to cut winter fuel. But they did have plans, didn't they? Age UK say cutting the winter fuel payment with very little notice will potentially jeopardise the health and finances of millions of older people. Does he agree with Age UK that this is the last thing both pensioners and the NHS need?
Mr. Speaker, we've been driving up with a campaign for pension credit. It's important that everybody who's entitled to it claims that pension credit. And she shouldn't claim as some great victory the record of their government that people haven't signed up. We're the ones with the campaign. They should be supporting it. But because of the triple lock, pensions will be going up by £470 next April. She hasn't answered the question. Her shadow chancellor says the triple lock is unsustainable. So she needs to explain how pensioners will be worse off under a Tory government.
It is Prime Minister's question. Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, we protected the triple lock during all our time in government. Meanwhile, energy bills are increasing, despite his promise to cut them by £300. In Scotland, his party leader wants to restore the winter fuel payments. Across England, councils are scrabbling together funds for struggling pensioners. The tragic reality this Christmas is pensioners will suffer and may even die as a result of this cruel policy. Did the Chancellor consider the impact on councils and on the NHS, or does she just not know what she's doing?
The Household Support Fund was set out in the budget. She knows that. We're pushing up pension credit. But she now says they are committed to the triple lock. Her shadow chancellor says they're not, that it's unsustainable. Maybe over a sandwich or a steak they could sort it out and come back and tell us what their policy actually is.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to misrepresent me to make his point. I don't need to misrepresent him to make my point. The truth is, he didn't think this through. Cutting winter fuel payments isn't just callous. It may not make savings. It could actually cost us all more. And that's not the only policy which is making things worse. The Chancellor's budget is a body blow to family businesses and also charities. Marie Curie have warned that Labour's budget will cost them nearly £3 million a year. This is a cancer charity saying they have no option but to reduce services. Did the Chancellor tell the Prime Minister that her jobs tax was going to hit charities?
Mr. Speaker, she's asked 3 questions about winter fuel with a leaving out. I'll come to that. But she's changed her mind on this. She used to say that the payments were a dead weight. She said there were members of her constituency who didn't need it. And they all stood in 2017 on a manifesto, a Tory manifesto, that committed to getting rid of the universal winter payments for pensioners. So we can see what their real commitment is. As for the budget, we're driving up productivity.
I don't want to have to ring your mother. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're driving up productivity, prosperity and living standards. That's a pay rise for the 3 million who are the lowest paid. They should welcome that. A pay rise for those working in the NHS and better than expected wage growth just before Christmas. What unites all three? Delivered by Labour, opposed by the Tories.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know what world he's living in. The economy is shrinking, and they did not think this jobs tax through or who it would impact. Another area affected is the hospice sector. Hospices believe the budget will cost them an extra £30 million. Yesterday, Conservatives voted to exempt social care, nurseries, charities and hospices from their jobs tax. Labour voted this down. So can the Prime Minister at least agree to fund hospices so they can continue their invaluable work helping people at the end of their lives?
Mr. Speaker, we put a record amount into the NHS in the budget to deal with the problem that they left, and we'll set out the funding arrangements for hospices in the new year. But it's the same old, same old. They want all the benefits. She said to herself she wants all the benefits from the budget, but she doesn't want to pay for any of them. That's what got us into the problem in the first place.
Mr. Speaker, I did not hear a commitment there to help hospices, which is a shame. The truth is, this winter, people will be suffering because of his choices. The economy is shrinking, inflation is going up, and jobs are being lost because of his budget. Pensioners won't be able to heat their homes because of his government's decisions. They raised people's hopes but then smashed them with broken promises. And now we learn that he is about to give away our hard-won Brexit freedoms. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, now we learn he is about to give away our hard-won Brexit freedoms. The truth is, they are punching the British people in the face, literally in the case of one of his MPs, and he will pretend that this is about the past. But we all know these are his choices, bad choices. If he's looking for a New Year's resolution, why doesn't he start with telling the truth?
I'll do it now. £22 billion black hole left by that. Record numbers on the waiting list. Nearly.
It's not a good time to leave the chamber, is it? Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, £22 billion black hole. Record waiting list with our NHS. They should hang their heads in shame. Immigration completely out of control. Nearly 1 million net migration. She was the cheerleader for all of that. She wants the truth. That's the truth. That's why they're sitting there. Mr. Speaker, whilst they cart from the sidelines, talking the country down, this government is getting on with the job. Record funding for the NHS. Money for our trains, buses, and yes, Mr. Speaker, potholes. Pay rises for 3 million of the lowest paid. Wages growing faster than inflation. Planning laws reform. Great British Energy set up. We're only getting started. Next year we'll continue to rebuild, no matter what the blockers opposite say.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I echo the words of the Prime Minister and thank you and all of our staff in this place alongside our armed forces and our emergency services and wish them a Merry Christmas. Mr. Speaker, March 2025 marks 20 years since the death of the only Member of Parliament to have held all four great offices of state: the Foreign Secretary, the Home Secretary, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, James Callaghan was a true Portsmouth great and went to the same school as another true Portsmouth great, my dad, Terry Nolan. Does the Prime Minister back my bid for a plaque to be added to his former home in Copner, and will he come along to Portsmouth next year to unveil it?
Well, I thank her for her question. Jim Callaghan was a giant of the Labour movement and a great public servant. Mr. Speaker, he left school at 17, served in our Royal Navy before becoming the Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, Chancellor and, of course, finally Prime Minister. And as a proud son of Portsmouth, I'm sure he'd be honoured to be remembered in such a way. Happy Christmas.
Can I just say to Mr. Mayor, I keep hearing, I heard you the other week over here, I'm hearing again that it's not a good time to push a luck today. Right. Let us come to Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Red David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his praise and best wishes for our armed forces and our emergency services? And can I join others in wishing you happy Christmas, Mr. Speaker, and all the staff of the Commons and indeed everyone across this House. I'm coming to sing in a minute. Mr. Speaker, I've had the great joy of spending time recently with some amazing young people from the Bath Philharmonia Young Carers Choir. They're a brilliant example of the power of music to make a difference in young people's lives. One member of the choir, Caitlin, has even developed a special new project to spread the joy of music to young people in our schools and communities. So will the Prime Minister meet Caitlin to hear more about her exciting project and work with us and others to support music in our schools and communities?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome his comments, and as he will know, today we're introducing the landmark Children's Wellbeing Bill to enable all children to succeed, including young carers. That increased the pupil funding premium to over £2.9 billion, which can be used to support pupils with identified needs, and that, of course, includes carers. And now young carers are on the school census, as he knows, that's since 2023. They have greater visibility, and schools will be better able to identify and support them. Mr. Speaker, he talks of singing. There was carols outside our front door on Monday, and my family was surprised to see the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman, shamelessly plugging his song. We have strict rules about antisocial behaviour, but in the spirit of the season, I simply say Happy Christmas.
Sir Ed Davis. Well, Happy Christmas, Prime Minister. Can I thank him for allowing the Young Carers Choir to sing outside number 10? I hope he and the staff enjoyed it. Our song is called Love Is Enough, but the hard truth is, for many young carers and young adult carers, actually love is not enough. These amazing young people need real action to help them with the challenges they face. So in addition to the measures that the Prime Minister just talked about, will he support the Carers Trust's Young Carers Covenant to make sure across government, across local authorities, we are supporting these young people with all the support they deserve?
We should support these young people, and we continue to work across the sector to ensure all schools identify, support and record data on young carers. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we boosted the carers allowance in the budget, but I agree with him in relation to these young carers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister in wishing everyone a very happy Christmas this year? For many in my constituency and indeed across the country, particularly those in temporary accommodation, it won't be a happy Christmas. On the Tories' watch, temporary homelessness more than doubled. So what is the government doing to support families and children living in temporary accommodation, particularly this season?
Well, she's right about the appalling inheritance, which included record numbers sleeping rough, almost 160,000 children living in temporary accommodation. Speaker, we're delivering nearly £1 billion into councils to tackle homelessness, including increasing funding in Bolton over the next year. That includes dedicated support with housing, with mental health, and with employment. But we're also committed to tackling the root causes, and that's why we're building 1.5 million new homes and abolishing Section 21 no-fault eviction, something they said they were going to do and repeatedly failed to do.
Ben Lake. In 2022, the Prime Minister supported calls for fair and fast compensation for 1950s women impacted by the changes to the state pension. And yet, just yesterday, his government rejected those same calls out of hand. Mr. Speaker, is this what the Prime Minister meant when he promised to lead a government of change?
Mr. Speaker, this is a serious issue. Between 2005 and 2007, there were, I think, a 28-month delay in letters to women born in the 1950s about changes to pension age. That was unacceptable, and it was right that the government apologised for that. In 2011, the former Chancellor George Osborne then accelerated those changes with very little notice. That equally was unacceptable, and Labour opposed it at the time. It is a serious issue. It's a complex issue. The research, as he knows, shows that 90% of those impacted knew about the changes that were taking place. And I'm afraid to say the taxpayer simply can't afford the tens of billions of pounds in compensation when the evidence does show that 90% of those impacted did know about it. That's because of the state of our economy.
Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recent data shows that almost 11,000 Scots have been waiting for hospital treatment for over 2 years after referral. The equivalent number in England is around 113. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that this shows the catastrophic damage the SNP government have done to the Scottish NHS?
Well, he's right when he says the SNP is letting down patients in Scotland. As the Scottish Auditor General says, greater leadership is needed in the Scottish NHS. Waiting list targets are being missed. Spending on agency staff is skyrocketing. And delays to patient discharge are hitting record levels. They seem to be proud of that appalling record. We've provided the money, they've got the powers, they've run out of excuses.
Blake Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the summer, thousands of commuters using Harlington and Flitwick stations have had to put up with nearly 8% of trains being cancelled in the evening peak, and nearly a third of trains that do arrive are more than 5 minutes late. Is it a mere coincidence, Mr. Speaker, that such poor performance follows this government's decision to pay off their union backers with no strings attached?
The trains and all travel was in an appalling state under the last government. We're clearing that up and fixing it, and he should be welcoming that.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Parliamentary Ombudsman concluded that an injustice was done to 1950s born women. It ruled that they are owed compensation and asked Parliament to intervene to deliver justice. In my constituency of Liverpool, West Derby, I have more than 5,000 women affected. And alongside a great many members in this House, I believe these women are owed compensation for the injustice done to them at the hands of the state. So will the Prime Minister give members the opportunity to vote on whether they believe Wasby women are owed compensation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've just set out the factual background and the percentage that knew about the change. And the simple fact of the matter is, in the current economic circumstances, the taxpayer can't bear the burden of tens of billions of pounds in compensation. Well, they're chuntering away. In 14 years, they accelerated the changes and not once spoke about compensation.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents, Caroline and Savannah, are just two of thousands across Devon, Cornwall and beyond who are living with postural tachycardia syndrome and have been unable to access adequate treatment since the retirement of the only consultant available to work with them in July. What action can the Prime Minister take to help me secure the treatment that my constituents need, and will he agree to meet with me and them to discuss the treatment of POTS in more detail?
Well, I thank her for raising this important issue on behalf of her constituents. It does underline the critical importance of the NHS workforce plan that we will deliver next summer to ensure that the export workforce is in place to get the NHS back on its feet. I am proud that we're investing an additional £22.6 billion to fix our NHS, and I will, of course, make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to deal with the issues of concern to her constituents.
Jodie Gosling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and a very Merry Christmas. May I associate myself with the comments of the Prime Minister and my gratitude to all of those that serve our communities over Christmas. I'd like to give special credit to foster carers in Nuneaton and across the UK for the incredibly important role that they play. We know that their care transforms lives, but the foster carers in Nuneaton tell me that there simply isn't the support that there used to be, and over 17% of children are waiting over 4 years for care. Recently, I was made aware of one child who had had 9 home placements before the end of Key Stage 1. Can the Prime Minister ensure that there will be a robust system to provide consistent and swift care when needed?
Well, I'm grateful to her for raising this issue because, Mr. Speaker, every single child deserves the best start in life, and there are far too many shocking cases of children being let down. The Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill is being introduced today, and that does put children's interests at the heart of government policy, and I hope it will be supported across the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour promised not to raise taxes on working people, but farmers are some of the hardest working people that I know. Peter Douglas from Jedburgh has looked at the details of this policy, and he says Labour's inheritance tax increase will prevent him passing on his family farm to his son and daughter. They say Labour have betrayed them. They can't trust the Prime Minister to keep his word. They've got a point, haven't they?
if he would kindly pass the details of the individual case he's raised to my team, we will look into it. As he knows, we put a record £5 billion into farming over the next 2 years in the budget. Just 2 weeks ago, £350 million was put in to support farmers. That contrasts with the £300 million underspend of the last government on farming. And in a typical case, the threshold is £3 million, which means that the vast majority of farmers will be unaffected. But I'll look into the individual case that he's raised with me.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently spoke to a man in Worksop whose son's arm was badly broken when he was knocked off his bicycle by an off-road biker speeding on the pavement. Dressed in black, no number plate, totally unidentifiable. The young boy no longer goes out to play. His experience isn't unique. What action is being taken to smash the bikes and put police back on our streets?
Well, I'm glad she's raised this, because off-road bikes were a complete nuisance under the last government, got completely out of control. We're introducing new respect orders to crack down on off-road bikes, strengthening police powers in relation to dealing with this big problem that got out of control under the last government. We will also deliver 13,000 more neighbourhood police to ensure that we keep control of our streets, something that was lost under the last government.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead announced plans to hike council tax by an unprecedented 25%. This would require the government's permission. Does he agree with me that this outrageous request should be rejected, that the borough might be a candidate for accelerated local government reorganisation, and my constituents should not be footing the bill for the persistent weak financial control and political failure locally?
Well, thank him for raising this issue on behalf of his constituents. We are, as he knows, committed to fixing the foundations of local government and keeping taxes as low as possible for working people. The budget announced real terms increase for local government with over £4 billion of added funding. And so we will put that support in place, and he's right to raise this issue.
Speaker, please, Liz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have in our NHS many brilliant emigre and refugee surgeons from the greatly troubled Middle East. And I've been privileged to work alongside some of them, Iran, Iraq, and now, as we think, especially of Syria. What practical measures can the UK take to help ensure that Syria now has the best chance of becoming an open society and the second functional democracy in the region?
Well, I thank him for drawing attention to the people of Syria and to the health workers of all backgrounds who do vital work in our NHS. The fall of Assad's brutal regime is to be welcomed and should be welcomed, but we must be cautious about what comes next. We've provided £50 million of extra support to vulnerable Syrians, and I've spoken to G7 leaders to work towards a Syrian government that respects international law, universal human rights, and protects all citizens across all sectors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Dave Dugan.
Mr. Speaker, before the election, this Prime Minister said he would lower energy bills by £300. Since he took office, they've gone up by £149. He said he would protect the winter fuel payment, but now he's in power, he stripped it off our pensioners. And he said he lined up for many photos with waspy women, saying he'd have their backs, and he's just betrayed them in the most scandalous way possible. This is now the defining characteristic of this one-trick phony Prime Minister who says one thing and does another. In Scotland, the SNP are 16 points ahead in the polls. Does he understand? Does he understand why the people of these islands, especially those of us in Scotland, treat him with such contempt?
They used to ask those questions. They used to ask those questions from this sort of area with very many MPs not so long ago. That all changed in July, and he's now carping from right up there. We can hardly hear him.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry I couldn't hear you over the hubbub. First of all, can I wish you a very Merry Christmas, and all colleagues across the House a very Merry Christmas, and especially the House staff. And also, I associate myself with the remarks thanking emergency services and our armed forces for their service. Mr. Speaker, Christmas is a time for peace and goodwill. Given there are more conflicts now than at any time since World War II, and that all wars end with a peace, what is the Prime Minister's resolution to work with others for a more peaceful world in 2025?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I thank her for her question? And I'm sure colleagues across the House support the values of the Parliamentarians for Peace, which I know she is involved with, and their work to support human rights across the globe. And that is the sentiment, I think, that we take into this festive period. Thank you.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it was good to hear that the Prime Minister visited British soldiers in Estonia yesterday before they have to spend Christmas away from their families. We would all like to see a lasting peace emerge for Ukraine in the new year, but Putin may take any deal brokered by Trump as a break in which to re-equip and rearm. What will his government do to deter Russia from restarting its imperial war of aggression following any peace deal?
Well, can I congratulate him on his appointment to the Intelligence and Security Committee and thank him for raising the question of our troops in Estonia who will be there over Christmas without their families, and they're right on the front line with a very clear sense of purpose as part of our NATO contingent, and we thank them. He's right that we must continue to support Ukraine, and that was the subject of our discussions in Estonia yesterday. Make sure Ukraine is put in the strongest possible position, whether negotiations or not, and be absolutely clear that this conflict could be ended straight away if the aggressor, Russia, backed off.
Mother of the House, Diane Abbott.
The WASPy women fought one of the most sustained and passionate campaigns for justice that I can remember, year in, year out. We did promise them that we would give them justice. I understand the issue about the cost, but does the Prime Minister really understand how let down WASPy women feel today?
I do understand the concern, of course I do. I set out the history, Mr. Speaker, but the research is clear that 90% of those impacted did know about the change. And in those circumstances, the taxpayer simply can't afford the burden of tens of billions of pounds of compensation. But I do understand the concerns.
Will Forster.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Prime Minister is aware of the case of my constituent, Zara Sharif, who was brutally tortured and appallingly murdered by her father and her stepmother. I want Zara's legacy to be one where she's the last vulnerable child to be killed by people that should have looked after her. Will the Prime Minister ensure that an independent inquest and review is taken into Zara's death and it's held immediately in the new year so we can learn why public authorities failed, so we can ensure that it never happens again?
He rightly raises this absolutely harrowing case, and it is important that all the lessons are learned. There is an independent process going on, but we must be clear about overhauling children's social care to keep young people safe and looking again about the framework for homeschooling, amongst other things. So we need to learn those lessons. We are taking steps. There is a process going on at the moment, and I'll update the House in due course.
Alan Strickland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for the leadership he has shown in securing the £500 million deal to secure the future of the Hitachi rail factory in my constituency. A factory left in the lurch by the party opposite for years. And will he agree with me that what we also need is a long-term plan for our proud high-tech rail manufacturing to drag it out of the mire it was left in by the Tories?
Thank you for that question. They really shouldn't groan. I went up to the Hitachi factory earlier this year before the election. The workforce were extremely anxious about the situation because they feared that there would be a gap between contracts. This is a gap This might mean people aren't going to get laid off, and he's chuntering from a sitting position, unable to understand the impact on working people. Mr. Speaker, the workforce were extremely anxious about the situation when I saw them, because they knew if their colleagues were laid off, then that would be bad for their colleagues in their community, and it would mean that they might go and get other jobs and not be able to come back if there was a new contract. I said then that I would do everything I could to ensure that we filled that gap, and I'm very pleased that just the other week we were able to say that there's a contract, and I went back up there to speak to the same workforce, and I can say they were very pleased that they don't now have those anxieties. They should be ashamed of their chuntering.
Final question, Dr. Luke Evans.
Mr. Speaker, as it's Christmas, will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Chris Middleton, who wrote a charity song to support Age UK, which has already raised £10,000. What's even better is it's likely to beat the leader of the Lib Dems and his single to #1 this year, proving yet again that the Lib Dems can't win. Something I hope we can both agree on.
I'm not going to adjudicate between the contending singles for the top of the charts, but I will end, Mr. Speaker, this is the last question, I think, by just repeating a happy Christmas and a peaceful New Year to everyone across the House.
Right, we'll let the front benches change up.